Chamber of Commerce, both who come to lobby against environmental rules that are being adopted by the EPA. These are just the latest GOP attacks on the environmental protections that Americans want and need. According to a recent Gallup poll, a sweeping majority of Americans believe climate change is real and that we need to act on pollution of our air and our water and destabilization of the climate. Yet just 2 months ago, Trump met with big oil executives and lobbyists to sell out U.S. energy policy. At a steak dinner, Trump told big oil and big gas CEOs that in exchange for a $1 billion contribution to his campaign, he would roll back environmental rules that protect us from unchecked pollution by the fossil fuel industry. We sent a letter to these CEOs in order to get more information about what happened at that dinner, and I'm still hoping and waiting for our colleagues to join us in getting to the bottom of that. The extremist Republican anti-environment agenda is laid out clearly in the infamous Project 2025 playbook, which would pick up where the Trump administration left off by gutting clean energy programs, repealing environmental rules, and eviscerating the EPA's budget and staff and their ability to act against pollution. To anybody who doubts the role that environmental rules and the EPA has played, I suggest looking at the Cuyahoga River near Cleveland, Ohio. In 1969, this river was one of the most polluted waterways in the country, and it actually caught on fire. A river caught on fire. That catastrophe and its health consequences led to the creation of the EPA and enactment of the Clean Water Act that our colleagues now want to undermine and destroy. Here is what the Cuyahoga River looked like before the EPA existed, and this is the America that some politicians want us to go back to, a time when the rivers were so polluted that prolonged exposure to the water would result in an emergency room visit. Now, on the other hand, after decades of work with local and state governments and communities, here is what the Cuyahoga River looks like today. We can literally see the physical difference made by the work of the EPA. This is what we've been able to do with the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the muscular enforcement that both the right-wing MAGA court and the right-wing MAGA Congress want to destroy and reverse. While extreme Republicans continue to prioritize big oil and corporate polluters over the health and safety of our people, and as our health and environmental protections are dismantled before our eyes by the Supreme Court, it's essential that we back the EPA and we sound the alarm about this attack on essential environmental regulations. The American people need to know the truth about what's at stake and what it means for our future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The ranking member yields back. Today we are joined by the Honorable Micheal S. Regan, who was sworn into office on March 11, 2021 as the Administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Prior to his nomination as EPA Administrator, Mr. Regan served as the Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witness will please stand and raise his right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative, and I thank you, and you may take a seat. We certainly appreciate you being here today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witness that we have read your written statement and it will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statement to around 5 minutes. You're a very important witness, so if you need to go over a little bit, that's certainly fine. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, it'll turn yellow. And when the red light comes on, you ask that you please wrap it up. But again, we know that you have a lot of important stuff to talk about today, and we certainly appreciate you being here. I now recognize Mr. Regan for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Comer and Ranking Member Raskin and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to share the U.S. EPA's work to advance a cleaner and healthier nation while ensuring that all people have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and that we remain globally competitive. Our partnership and our open and transparent dialogue with Congress is key to ensuring that my agency can carry out its mission of protecting public health and the environment. And over the last year, EPA has been hard at work doing just that. We're cleaning up our water. I'm proud to say that we finalized historic protections that address PFAS contamination will bring more than 100 million people cleaner drinking water. This will prevent thousands of deaths and reduce tens of thousands of serious illnesses across the country. We're protecting people from toxic chemicals. We recently banned chrysotile asbestos, the last remaining kind of asbestos used in our country, which has been linked to more than 40,000 deaths in the United States each year. Additionally, EPA's Toxic Substance Control Act program demonstrates how effective our work is when we receive adequate resources from Congress. With the increased resources we received in 2022 and 2023, EPA more than doubled the number of chemical reviews each month and cleared out more than half of the older backlog cases. And we're also cleaning up our air. In March, EPA announced the final national pollution standards for passenger cars, light-duty trucks, and medium-duty vehicles for model years 2027 through 2032. These standards will avoid more than 7 billion tons of carbon emissions and provide nearly $100 billion of annual net benefits. EPA's greatest and most fundamental responsibility is protecting public health and the environment. And every single day, we're upholding our commitment to the American people. EPA follows the science, we follow the law, and we remain committed to openness and transparency. I'm proud to say that in April, my agency announced 4 final rules under separate authorities to reduce climate, air, water, and land pollution from fossil fuel-fired power plants. Finalizing these standards on the same day helps ensure that the power sector can confidently prepare for the future by enabling strategic, long-term investments and establishing an informed multi-year planning process. Folks, I understand just how important our role is in the power sector and our nation's economic growth and competitiveness. And I also understand that protecting public health has never come at the expense of a strong and durable economy. EPA's action reflects this understanding. Transparency is key and engagement is vitally important. I want to be clear, through all of our rulemakings, we engage with and receive input from the regulators, the institutions, the stakeholders, all of the individuals who will help shape the future of our country. Furthermore, President Biden's Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act provide a historic, once-in-a-generation opportunity to invest in America's future, a future that will change people's lives for the better. The historic funding Congress has provided my agency is creating millions of jobs, modernizing our nation's infrastructure, combating climate change, and putting us on a path to win the 21st century and beyond. And EPA is doing the job Congress has asked us to do by putting these funds to work to fulfill our critical mission. As an agency, EPA is dedicated to open communication, fairness, and transparent engagement with Congress and with the American people. EPA recognizes and respects the importance of Congress's interest in obtaining information necessary to perform its legitimate oversight. With respect to the Oversight Committee, we have responded in good faith to committee requests by providing approximately 23,000 pages of documents. A response to every letter from the committee, 8 briefings, testimony at a subcommittee hearing, and numerous staff-level calls. And we're fully committed to continuing to cooperate with you, as well as the Office of Inspector General and the U.S. Government Accountability Office. I'm confident and proud of the hard work at EPA, and I'm proud of the work that we've undertaken to protect public health and the environment, while responsibly stewarding taxpayer resources. Under President Biden's leadership, Americans in every state and every town will lead healthier lives, breathing cleaner air, drinking cleaner water, and seeing a brighter economic future. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to submit the testimony for the record, and I look forward to our continued partnership in answering all questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now begin our 5 minutes of questions. The chair recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman. Mr. Regan, you and my Democratic colleague mentioned the great work of the EPA. I just want to point out that the photograph that he showed and the subsequent cleanup of the Cuyahoga River is indicative of all of our commitment to cleaning up our environment. And we've made remarkable progress. Since 1980, our economy's grown by 791%. Vehicle miles traveled has gone up 113%. Population's increased by 47%, and that's probably not counting the illegals that have crossed our border. Energy consumption's up 29%. But the 6 criteria gases that the EPA tracks have all gone down 60%. And that's your data. One of the things that concerns me is about how you've gone about things and basically taking the lawmaking authority away from Congress. I'm very encouraged by the Chevron, the overturning of the Chevron deference that the Supreme Court did last week, because it restores the responsibility for lawmaking and the accountability for lawmaking to Congress where it belongs. But there's another thing that the EPA has been engaged in that concerns me, and that's basically sue and settle. In March of this year, the Inspector General issued a report that found the EPA does not properly store its procurement data, paving the way for fraudulent, collusive behavior with vendors receiving contracts and subcontracts. This prevents the Inspector General from adequately conducting oversight. Are you doing anything to correct this?
We have.
It's a yes or no.
We have, yes.
Okay, good. I'd like to know if you would report to the committee in writing what you've done to correct this, because it's not the first time these questions have been raised about the EPA's potential collusion with friendly outside parties, especially when environmental groups during litigation. It's, as I said, sometimes referred to as sue and settle litigation. So when was the last time the government audited EPA litigation? Have you had an audit?
I'm not quite sure of which specific audit you're referring to, but
Your litigation.
we welcome all audits.
Well, I would like to know and report to the committee whether or not you've had an audit of EPA involvement in litigation. The Biden administration revoked the Trump administration's policies to publish and notice settlement details and pre-litigation announcements. And I want to know what efforts the EPA has made to reduce the settlement costs using taxpayer dollars. Can you report to that to the committee as well?
Yes, we can report to the progress we've made to evolve that document to provide more transparency, which is what those changes.
But I want to know how much you've spent taxpayer dollars in these settlement cases. And if the government auditors cannot access data to adequately track management of contracts or litigation costs, then what resources are available to Congress and the public to track the taxpayer expenses for these activities? Do you have any response to that in terms of your oversight? Because you should be reporting to Congress with full transparency about your litigation efforts in these sue and settle cases.
I do believe that we are reporting responsibly to Congress. I meet frequently with my Inspector General. We have taken just about all of the recommendations.
Well, your Inspector General, as I said, reported that you do not properly store your procurement data, which paves the way for fraudulent, collusive behavior, and that's one of my big concerns, is that there's been collusive behavior, involvement with these outside groups. I want to move to something else that concerns me too, is the House of Representatives sent 2 letters to the EPA. One was in December of last year, one was April of this year, signed by 22 members respectively, including 10 members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Both the letters raised serious questions about whether the EPA's proposed $2 billion regulation on the lime industry is necessary, given that the EPA's own scientists have determined that the emissions from lime plants are already acceptable with an ample margin of safety. And in September of last year, the House Science Committee held an oversight hearing, and you testified that you think and you said this: I think what we want to do is to ensure that we're meeting the letter of the law with as much flexibility as possible. I think we have to be reasonable, and I think what we want to do is protect public health and ensure that these industries can be productive. How in the world is finalizing a $2 billion regulation providing as much flexibility as possible and being reasonable?
Well, I think if you look at that finalized action, we took into consideration many of the recommendations that industry asked us to.
Do you know what lime is used for?
To protect
Mr.
health and
Administrator Regan, do you know what lime is used for?
I absolutely do.
What's it used for?
Well, it can be used for a lot of things.
Yeah, but what is it primarily used for in the construction?
You can use lime for agriculture. You can use lime for construction. I mean, there's a lot of
You can't make, it's a key ingredient in concrete cement.
It's a key ingredient in a lot of things. It's not just cement.
And you just imposed a $2 billion regulation on it, then all that cost can be passed on to consumers, to increase food prices,
we put
increase.
protective standards in place so that workers and people who are exposed to lime.
But your own administration says that you've determined it's acceptable with an ample margin of safety. That's not reasonable.
It's acceptable in certain instances. I think that's a narrative or a context that I'd love to have this conversation. Maybe we could look at the full breadth of the statement that the scientists are making.
You're-
I'm very aware of the statements that our scientists are making, and so I think that may be out of context.
Well, I'm very encouraged by the Chevron deference being overturned because it will restore to Congress our lawmaking authority and remove it from
All right.
these agencies. I yield back.
And gentlemen, time's expired. We went a minute over, so the Democrats can have that extra minute at some point. Chair recognizes Ranking Member Raskin.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Regan, let me just follow up on that, because I do think that there's a significant philosophical difference that was just surfaced in the colloquy between Mr. Palmer and yourself. There's no doubt that there's industry that wants more of a freedom to pollute without having environmental rules imposed against them. But your purpose is to defend the freedom to breathe clean air and drink clean water and have a safe working place. And I wonder if you would describe what the mission of the EPA is.
Well, the mission of the EPA is to protect public health and the environment, look at cost-effective technologies to do so, and ensure that this country can remain globally competitive. And I do that in concert with state regulators in blue and red states, but also actively engaging industry to come up with the right solutions.
And that's a mission that has been, for a lot of American history, a bipartisan one. It was under President Nixon that the EPA was first created, right?
Correct.
And so there's nothing that should be partisan about the pursuit of clean air, clean water, clean working conditions. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
Okay. I wonder, what is your perspective on what would happen if the proposals in the Project 2025 blueprint for a mega takeover of government were implemented? What would happen if all of the rules that they want to repeal at the EPA were repealed?
Well, listen, I think when you look at the massive cuts that are being suggested, we won't get new pesticides, new registrants on the market. We will significantly hurt our agriculture industry, reducing the herbicides that we can get on the market. We won't clear all of the litigation that's tied our hands to get chemicals on the market that we rely on every day. Listen, we would have significant impacts to our water quality. Emerging contaminants like PFAS would run amok. We would continue to have lead-poisoned water all across the country. We would not be able to look at how to clean up brownfield sites and benefit not just from a health standpoint, but from the economic vitality and opportunity of cleaning up these blighted sites. The list just goes on and on. America needs a strong EPA.
I remember when Donald Trump took out his Sharpie and purported to change the direction of a hurricane. I think it was Hurricane Dorian back in 2019. But he basically said it was not going to hit the Florida coast, it was going to hit Alabama. And he did this without any consultation with the National Weather Service, or NOAA, where the National Weather Service is located. And then it created huge confusion and consternation. I mean, what would happen if we replaced professional scientific civil service management of agencies like the Weather Service or NOAA or the EPA with political flunkies, basically, people who are just willing to say whatever the president wants to say? What would that do to our ability to have effective public policy if science is something that could just be made up by a president?
If we don't follow the science and have qualified people in these positions, Americans will die. We have a role to play, and we need to be able to predict the weather. We need to be able to respond to the weather. We need to be able to alert the public that if danger is coming their way. And once many of these communities are hit, whether it's a wildfire or a flood or a hurricane, we need to be able to go in and be activated to help bring those communities back to life, whether it's Maui, Hawaii, or whether it's East Palestine, Ohio, or Jackson, Mississippi. When a city is hit, we need experts to come in and ensure that there's clean air and clean water.
So how have you regarded the war on science and the war on public health that we saw during COVID-19. We saw in this committee when Dr. Fauci came the other day, we had members of this committee accusing Dr. Fauci of having created COVID-19 and profiting from it. How do you experience that attack on science in terms of your ability to get your work done?
Well, you know, it's threatening reality and the facts. And what we've done under this administration is restore scientific integrity, which, by the way, industry, businesses, all of our economic partners applaud us for doing this. We're saving lives, and we're putting pragmatic, practical regulations in place so that we can provide many of our industries regulatory certainty. They need to have regulatory certainty so that they can make the proper investments.
So would you say that the success of the EPA depends on the integrity of the science that goes into it, and you are threatened by the political science of the MAGA people who say, we want to dictate a political agenda to people who work for EPA or the Weather Service or NOAA?
Politics of no party has any role in scientific integrity. And if we don't remain in a place where we're transparent and bolstering our scientific integrity, we will lose the trust of the public. Scientific integrity is at the core of EPA's mission to protect all people.
Thank you very much for your hard work, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
All right. Chair now recognizes Mr. Higgins from Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Reagan, you said you don't want to lose the trust of the American people. Too late. It's already happened. Economic prosperity is the cornerstone of societal advancement worldwide. And the cornerstone of economic prosperity is affordable, abundant, transportable energy product. Ladies and gentlemen, and you young Americans across the country, please join me in loving your planet and living your life in a manner that you intend to protect your planet for future generations by recognizing that economic prosperity worldwide is a -- driver of clean air and clean water and reduced pollution worldwide. So the energy product that the world consumes, including the fuel that you use to get here, the petrochemical products produced by the fossil fuel industry that Mr. Reagan is wearing upon his back, that clothes that you're wearing, the carpet upon which you're standing, the finish on the chair where you're sitting, the petrochemical products that make up 100% of the phone or the computer that you're typing on is consumed worldwide. Our world being one, if you're concerned about the ecological impact of mankind upon your planet, and you recognize that mankind is going to consume petrochemical products, then you would want it produced in the region of the earth where it's produced the cleanest, under the most stringent regulations and the most industry-driven technological advancement to deliver clean, affordable product. That's the United States of America. Men like Mr. Reagan have carried a torch 100% driven by an agenda to smash the American energy industry. He's the one that's agenda-driven, not me. The American energy industry and the American petrochemical industry is, with no debate, the cleanest producer of affordable energy product and affordable petrochemical product in the world. And every one of you consume it. Own that. Because that's where we are. In the future, I have no doubt that there will be a gradual transition to things unknown. This is the nature of life. It's the way things roll. But to have it have an agenda-driven Green New Deal, anti-American energy, anti-American petrochemical agenda shoved down our throat by an administration that claims it's doing so on behalf of protecting the world's ecological stability by forcing the production of these products into regions of the world that have far less concern about their ecological impact. That is hypocrisy at its worst. And I, for one, am going to use every authority that Congress allows me to legally wield to push back against it. Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record the Joint Resolution 161, a joint resolution calling for the reversal of the EPA rule submitted by this gentleman and his department.
Without
Unanimous consent.
without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Reagan, do you have plans for next year, sir? You have plans for next year?
I have plans for every year.
What's your plans for next year?
Well, my plans are personal. And I don't
Well, I'm
know- and
asking you
I don't know
professionally.
Well,
You have plans
I
to
don't- I'm not
continue
obligated to-
your battle
I'm
that
not-
you're carrying that torch for?
With you just assaulting me and saying I'm un-American.
You think
now
this
wanna
was an
know-
assault?
Now you want to know what my plans
We
are?
definitely living in two different worlds.
Oh, yeah, we are in two different worlds.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman,
I appreciate
I have an inquiry.
this
Mr. Chairman,
hearing being
Mr.
convened.
Chairman, I have an inquiry.
Gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Mfume.
I'm going to
I have-
reclaim
I
my
have an-
time.
And you have time left, Mr. Higgins. Mr. Mfume.
I have an inquiry of the chair. Mr. Chairman, we disagree on a lot of issues in this committee a lot of times, but we always ought to look and put a stop sign in front of ourselves when we start assailing by name the personal integrity of any witness. I mentioned this a few weeks ago with Mr. Fauci. It continues to happen. I want to make sure I'm on the record so that members of the committee on both sides of the aisle will at least respect the personal integrity of a witness before this committee.
The chair recognizes Mr. Higgins for his final few
Chairman,
seconds.
This is the Oversight Committee. This is where government is forced to sit in front of Congress and be held accountable for their actions.
Mr.
If
Chairman,
that
isn't the
reflects
gentleman's time
of
up?
their personal
Isn't-
integrity, that's
Mr.
not my
Chairman, but
problem.
It's
Mr. Chairman, I yield.
not the McCarthy era.
Gentleman
It's
yields
not
back.
the McCarthy committee.
Order. Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Administrator Regan, thank you for being here today. Climate change and pollution are among the most urgent crises of our time. Addressing them requires real action and innovative solutions. The Biden-Harris administration and Democrats in Congress took real action and delivered innovative solutions when we passed the bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. As a result, we are making historic investments in our communities to fight climate change and protect our environment and public health, including more than $50 billion for EPA to strengthen our nation's water infrastructure after decades of underinvestment. The District of Columbia is benefiting from billions of dollars in funding, much of which will go toward replacing toxic lead pipes. Removing these dangerous pipes will make our drinking water safer, prevent health crises, and protect children from lead poisoning that can lead to lifelong harm. Administrator Regan, why is investing in our water infrastructure an urgent priority for the administration?
Well, thank you for that question, Congresswoman, and it's vital for public health and for our economy. Our nation's water infrastructure is crumbling, which will have an impact on our global competitiveness. But more importantly, I've met with so many mothers whose children are lead poisoned, and we're seeing lead poisoned children all over this country, and that's why the President and the Vice President have prioritized removing 100% of our lead pipes. I'm happy to say that D.C. will receive more than $28 million to reduce or replace their lead pipes in our most recent funding announcement this May. But it's vitally important that every single person in this country has access to clean drinking water, clean, affordable drinking water.
Administrator Regan, the bipartisan infrastructure law also provided D.C. with much-needed funding to help with ongoing brownfields cleanup projects and to replace antiquated diesel-fueled buses with modern battery electric buses. D.C. is also using pollution prevention grants, which will robustly which were robustly funded under the law to support a range of projects, including those aimed at improving public health and the environment in D.C.'s disadvantaged communities. The Inflation Reduction Act, meanwhile, has provided D.C. with millions in grant funding focused on pollution reduction and creating a carbon neutrality plan for D.C. We are seeing important projects like these not only in the District of Columbia, but throughout the country. Administrator Regan, what are some other success stories of the administration's historic investments in protecting our environment?
Well, we have quite a few, and I would say when we think about Washington, D.C., and we look at the success of our brownfields program, we are revitalizing blighted communities and turning these communities into economic centers, but also reducing the pollution to many communities, which increases the tax base, increases the healthiness of communities. You mentioned electric school buses. We've issued electric school buses in Washington, D.C. We've also issued about $62.5 million to expand the benefits of solar energy to lower income communities in the district as well. We are looking at a combination of infusing new technologies that will make the city more competitive while cleaning up pollution and making its citizens healthier. I call that a huge success, and we're seeing that all over the country.
Well, I do too. Looking at all these important environmental projects, who would be left behind? Who would be left behind if we choose nothing? What would the consequences be of inaction?
Well, you know, who would be left behind are the least amongst us, our low-income communities. Disproportionately hit would be our black and brown and tribal communities. Most of these communities are not the communities that have generated the pollution or used the energy, but are on the receiving end of the brunt of the storms or the pollution. And so it's imperative that we take a look at ensuring that every single person in this country has clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and that we engage with our communities to invest in solutions that they've had for decades. We cannot afford, as a country, to leave anyone behind.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Gosar from Arizona.
Thank you very much, Administrator Regan. There's been a big push since Congress to expand the RECA, or the Radiation Exposure and Compensation Act, in areas that are far away, very far away from the original testing sites, which were in Nevada. In fact, there was 1,054 detonations in Nevada, which composes almost 95% of all those exposures. And yet, when we had RECA, there was an administrative error in which southeastern Nevada, northwestern Arizona were excluded from this aspect. Now, we started investigating this. I've been doing this bill for forever, since 2010, because before it was even cool to talk about. One area that seems we can argue about should expand RECA is to St. Louis, Missouri. Very important here. However, I take an acute interest in the existing Superfunds on the EPA's national priorities list that cover radiation in this area. Let's look at these. One Superfund site, the St. Louis Airport, Hazelwood Interim Storage, and Futura Coatings Company, site was listed in October of 1989 and consists of 3 areas used for the storing of radioactive waste from uranium processing in St. Louis. Another, the Westlake landfill site, was listed in August of 1990 and covers a site where 43 tons of uranium or processing residues in soil were disposed of in 1973. Here's my questions. These Superfunds are supposed to contain and deal with the effects of this radiation, right? Do you believe your agency is effectively addressing the issue of radiation exposure in the St. Louis area?
I do. I do believe that, as you've mentioned, it's a tough topic and hard to get your arms wrapped around. I think that we are, and I think that the combinations of cleanups and closures that we're offering do provide adequate protection for surrounding communities.
Okay, so then why is there a reason to expand RECA to this area? It doesn't make any sense to me because RECA was developed for the exposure of above ground bombing that the federal government took acknowledgement from. So why do we have to expand RECA? I know these people need some help, but why wouldn't Superfunds follow all that up?
Well, this is a specific issue that maybe we should discuss because I know that when these sites or expansions occur, that typically means more federal dollars come in to help with the cleanup if there is a different use for this.
So I agree with you, but my point is we spend a ton of money on these super sites. Why aren't they addressing these exposures to radiation from this point forward instead of RECA? I mean, I've got people who have waited now. Their exposure has now been almost 70 years, and they've been excluded because of an administrative error from what Congress intended to the bill writing. It had nothing to do with us being the error. And I've been pushed off. We tried to do this in the NDA. We tried to do this all the way around. I've been told by bureaucrats, you know what, tough luck. You have to have more money. We have to get it included. And now all of a sudden I find that these poor people, these Native Americans in northwestern Arizona, the southeastern Nevada folks, don't have any compensation possibilities. I got some problems with that. You know, I want this money to be appropriate because you can talk all about the administration and rules and regulations, but the other part of wasting money is it the contractor who's not doing their job? Is it the supervision of the Army Corps of Engineers who's not adequate? I don't know, but we have to have some answers here because we got one more chance at this. The rest of these people aren't going to be around. And it's meager, folks. You have to show that you prove that you lived in this area for an amount of time just to be able to get $35,000. I find this a radical injustice in that regards. And so I've got a lot of other things with PM10s and all that other stuff, but this is very poignant to me.
Okay.
So I would love to have your forefront pushing this right away because we have not renewed the RECA standards, and we need to. But I need to understand why all of a sudden we're getting this big push from Missouri from these Superfund aspects to maybe included in that. I want people to get their due diligence. But why does RECA have to be this part? Why can't the Superfunds take that? Could I get that answer from you?
Yes, you have my personal commitment that we'll work on this and see what we can do.
Thank you. My last little question was, you know, we have all these pharmaceuticals in our water supply. The gentlelady from D.C. talked about it. And I know you really don't have a jurisdiction. The FDA really does. But how clean is our water with regards to the disposal of these pharmaceuticals? Most of them going down into our water supply. Could you address that real quickly?
Yeah, presently, in my conversations with FDA and other health agencies, our water is clean. Our water is clean and drinkable, and when it's not, we advise citizens to follow boil water advisories or any other advisories that a local entity might.
Could I interrupt you right there? But steroidal manufacturing of these pharmaceuticals bypasses our normal type prospects, if I understand this right. I'm a dentist by profession, or was. So how can you assure me that those compounds are not still in the water?
Gentleman, time's expired, but please answer the very important question.
I think what we do is we match our expertise with the expertise of FDA, and from a regulatory standpoint, try to ensure that a wastewater treatment facility, a drinking water facility, has the best technology, and that's where we run those tests. I think, to your point, this is more of an FDA, EPA combined answer, and we can get our staffs together to work on getting a better answer for you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Lynch from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member. First of all, I want to say thank you, Administrator Regan. We've been working in my district. I represent a coastal area that goes from the north end neighborhood of Boston all the way down to Hingham. So we are right on the coast, and we've been working with your regional people in my area on seawalls because of it's even just during my lifetime, we've seen incredible sea level rise along that coast in Massachusetts, and I'm sure there are other communities that have benefited from your good work as well. And also we had tremendous PFAS issues. We've got an older area, formerly heavily industrial, so the EPA in our region has been extremely helpful in helping us put in filtration systems that now allow people to turn on their taps and get clean water instead of having to have the town administration provide free bottled water, which was happening for quite a while. I want to talk to you about the Chevron case, the Chevron decision. So just to be clear, up until last week, when Congress passed legislation that might have been general in nature and had some ambiguity to it, which is basically every single bill that we pass, because we can't address every eventuality. In the past, the courts were required to defer to agency expertise as long as the agency interpretation was reasonable. In other words, you know, it's not just the EPA on pharmaceutical development. You know, the FDA interpretations of statutes that they are directed by held sway, as long as it was reasonable. Same thing with labor laws. You know, the labor laws are meant to protect workers, and as long as the Department of Labor made interpretations that were consistent with that mission, it was accepted by the court, and they afforded the difference. The SEC, the mission was to protect investors, and as long as the SEC was making interpretations of ambiguous sections of the law that was consistent with and reasonable within the contours, the four corners of that law, that deference was afforded to the agency. Now, that's over. That's over. And so I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm sure you've had a chance to look at this with counsel. What do you think the impacts are going to be for the EPA and your responsibility, your mission to make sure that we have clean air, clean water, and the sundry other missions that you must follow?
Well, as you can imagine, I and we are deeply disappointed. This hits EPA extremely hard. We have world-class experts who for decades have been honing their skills to work on behalf of the American people and render judgment on policies and regulations that would be most protective of everyone in this country. And so we will gather ourselves and continue to leverage that expertise in every way we can because, again, our charge is to ensure that every single person in this country, all of our children, have access to clean drinking water and clean air and healthy lands.
Well, thank you. I also want to just thank you again. We in this Congress have passed legislation to provide for zero-emission vehicles, not only private vehicles, but in a framework that would allow people to, you know, charge those vehicles. But also, we've looked at the United States Postal Service and the 237,000 vehicles that they use each and every day, and we're in the process of converting many of our older vehicles to electric vehicles. And I just want to thank you and the EPA for your cooperation on that measure, and it can't happen soon enough. Mr. Chairman, the previous Republican member consumed an additional minute, and I would ask to have access to that extra 60 seconds, if I might.
We've been going back and forth. I've been keeping up with it. I thought we were about even because Mr. Raskin went over a minute. But if you have a good question to ask, please.
Well, I
feel
would
free
like
go
to
ahead and ask it.
yield the last minute to the ranking member.
Okay. I'll find some other time to get in, Mr. Chairman. I'll get back in. Thank you, and I thank the distinguished.
Chair recognizes Mr. Sessions from Texas for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Administrator, welcome. There's already this morning some disagreement about the questions that we're asking you. I've heard you very clearly talk about the EPA under your leadership as cost-effective solutions, pragmatic. American needs a strong EPA, scientific-based answers, fairness. So I'd like to engage in a dialogue with you if I can, as opposed to a long-winded opportunity here. Please tell me, as we talk about formaldehyde, are you aware that the European Union occupational exposure limit was just codified at 300 parts per billion?
Yes.
You were, thank you. Are you aware that the air outside this building and the air in this room is naturally occurring with formaldehyde?
I can't speak to the.
Well, you're the head of the EPA. If you don't know that formaldehyde is everywhere as we breathe it, not only in this building but outside, so I'll tell you that answer is yes. Let it be noted the head of the EPA did not understand that formaldehyde is a naturally occurring substance. Are you aware that the Human Studies Review Board, known as HSRB, within EPA, opposed and had problems with the recommendation of 11 parts per billion that is now being codified into your rules and regulations? Were you aware that they had problems with 11 parts per billion?
I was not aware.
We're not aware. Are you, the gentleman, aware that the permissible parts per billion is 750 parts per billion under OSHA for exposure limit for formaldehyde?
Congressman Sessions, for the types of questions you're asking, we have
They're very
experts.
direct.
They have
You are the head of this organization, and you have proposed taking to 11 parts per billion. You showed up here and you talked about fairness, cost-effective solutions, pragmatic, scientific-based, and yet within your own boards that provide you with data and information, they have said 11 parts per billion is well out of line and cannot even be measured. And yet our friends, your friends that are up here on this committee, as we are asking you what are not tough questions. They're really pragmatic, they're science-based, they're cost-effective ways to look at things, and you are standing behind changing some 20 of these different chemicals and putting them to standards that would be, once again, Europe has their occupational exposure limit is 300 parts per billion. America's at this time under OSHA is 750 parts per billion. You did not know that it is regularly occurring all around in every room outside, and yet your own committee within your Department of Human Studies Review Board said, please do not do this. We have problems, and yet you have put your stamp on 11 parts per billion that is not even able to be calculated. And yet, if you look at 11 to 300 to 750, you chose to show up here and to say to this committee and to plead with us, you have to save every single life, and yet it cannot even be measured. You talk about fairness, you talk about cost effectiveness, you talk about being pragmatic, you talk about science-based answers, and the head of EPA showed up today and said he did not even know that formaldehyde was regularly, naturally occurring at levels well above 11 parts per billion. Mr. Chairman, this is why we seemingly have problems and why my side, yes, we are Republicans, and we're not these crazy-eyed people that you have heard about today. We are saying we want you to be pragmatic. We want you to be fair. But you can't even justify 11 parts per billion because it can't even be measured. There are no scientific measures to measure that on a regularly recurring basis. And you have put an onus on industry. Formaldehyde is used in plastics, it's used in cars, it's used in national security, it's used all over the United States, what we would call the free enterprise system, but it's capitalism.
Thank
and
you.
it's a cost-effective
Mr.
way
Sessions.
to look
We're out of
at
time.
things. I
Thank you.
yield back my time. Sir, we do want to talk.
All right, I would now like to recognize Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. We've heard a lot today. I'd like to bring this conversation a little bit down to earth and make it more about the people that we're here to serve. I'm the Congresswoman for the Bronx and Queens. I represent a community that has some of the highest childhood asthma rates in the United States. And when we hear this conversation about how regulations threaten economic prosperity, and I jotted it down earlier because I couldn't even believe that I heard it, that economic prosperity, quote, is the #1 driver of clean air and clean water, as though our rivers were somehow, I mean, our rivers and forests were clean and unpolluted before a single factory was constructed in this country. That is the state of nature. I want us to be clear about that. Now, when we hear people use this term economic prosperity, I want folks to know at home what that is a shadow screen for is a term otherwise known as profit. Wall Street profit, very often. And Administrator Regan, you've been accused of sabotaging here the economic prosperity of this country for enforcing and introducing regulations about chemicals that this committee itself has investigated, such as PFAS. I'd like for us to dig into that a little bit. PFAS is a chemical byproduct of, and it's a chemical that's in almost everything. Teflon pans, workout gear, fire extinguisher foam. What are some of the health consequences that we have seen as a result of elevated levels of PFAS for everyday Americans?
Well, you know, they range from various types of cancers, death. These carcinogenic elements are wreaking havoc on communities all across the country.
We've had people from PFAS-affected, especially PFAS-affected communities, that have had fertility issues. Is that correct?
Yes.
Testicular cancer?
Yes.
Is that correct? Developmental delays in children? Is that consistent with what you've seen?
Yes.
Thyroid issues, increased risk of cancer, correct?
Yes.
And those people, those kids, those parents who are struggling to conceive now, that's who we respond to. That's who we answer to, correct, Administrator Regan?
Absolutely.
The American people. Now, I want to name something. This isn't just economic prosperity. There are people and organizations and companies responsible for this. DuPont and 3M are two of the largest corporations that were responsible for PFAS dumping in the United States. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did they know that these chemicals were potentially toxic? Is that correct?
We believe they did.
And yet, there are members here of this committee that want to defend the quote-unquote economic right for a company to poison its people, the American people. Now, when we talk about economic prosperity, if you're a kid in the South Bronx, if you are a mom in rural Pennsylvania near a PFAS dumping site, who comes ahead when you get cancer and have a medical bill to pay? Who comes out ahead from that PFAS dumping? The CEO of DuPont or that mom? So when we talk about the bills and the prosperity that gets made from here and who has to pay that, we need to understand a very simple economic concept called externalities. Externalities, the costs of pollution, the cost of poisoning that are not factored into the profit margin of the corporation that's actually wreaking havoc on this planet. And when we talk about issues like climate change, it is at its core an issue of externalities, because ExxonMobil and all of these oil companies can afford to burn this planet to a crisp because it makes them a pile of money. Now, Administrator Regan, I want to thank you, because in the character attacks that you have experienced in this hearing, I know that you have spent your entire time and your entire federal service
Your time is up. I
protecting
appreciate
families
it
from
this
being
morning.
poisoned.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, I would now like to recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Regan, as part of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, the EPA established the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, which now manages $3 billion for environmental and climate justice to fund community-based NGOs. As part of the allocation, $600 million is devoted to the Environmental Justice Thriving Communities grant-making program, which has shown serious signs of waste, fraud, and abuse. More alarmingly, some of this money has been designated for groups opposed to the interests of the United States and her allies. So my questions today, Mr. Regan, are yes or no, very simply yes or no. Administrator Regan, environmental justice grantees have partners and affiliates who also receive funds from the EPA. Are any of these groups or affiliates who receive this money anti-American, yes or no?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are any of these groups who receive this money anti-Semitic, yes or no?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are any of these groups explicitly anti-Israel?
You're talking about that have received money?
That are on the list to receive money, correct? Yes or no? Are any of these groups explicitly anti-Israel? Do they hate Jews?
None of these groups have
Okay,
received
are any
money.
of these groups opposed to police and law enforcement? Yes or no?
I think we have to establish the point that none of
The
these groups have
question is
received
yes
money.
or no. Are any of these groups opposed to police and law enforcement? Yes or no?
None of the groups have received money.
That's not the question. Are any of these groups who are allotted to get money from this fund anti-police? Yes or no?
I'm not
You know
quite
exactly what
sure.
I'm talking about. Are
Yeah.
you familiar with the group called Climate Justice Alliance? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. I was surprised to learn that $50 million has been designated for Climate Justice Alliance, a group which explicitly publishes a Free Palestine section on its website. On the website, there are dozens of anti-Semitic and alarming images designed to be printed and used in the violent pro-Hamas protests we've seen across the country. Here are a few of them this morning. This first image includes a slogan that is widely recognized as a call to eradicate the state of Israel. Is this the official position of the Biden EPA? Yes or no?
Is it the what?
Official position of Biden's EPA? Yes or no?
That is not our problem.
Does this sign protect the environment? Yes or no?
That is not our problem.
This group, where this image came from, is designated to receive $50 million.
Has that group received
So
any
this sign says freedom for Palestine. What does it say at the bottom? From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Should taxpayers pay for this kind of thing,
Well, I
yes
think
or
you're
no?
misrepresenting the fact.
We're not misrepresenting. My second image that I'm going to show you today,
You're
this
misrepresenting the
image
facts.
calls, I'm speaking and I'm going to reclaim my time.
Yeah, you're misrepresenting.
This image calls to defund the police and accuses the United States of violence. Is this the official position of Biden's EPA, yes or no?
No, that's a problem.
Okay, does this sign protect the environment, yes or no?
I don't know what that
The
says.
group that produces this sign is allotted to get $50 million from U.S. taxpayers. The next
what is your
image,
definition
The
of
next
allotted?
image I'm going to show you, I would like you to read this poster from your seat. Can you tell me what this says?
I think you can read for yourself.
I'm asking you to read the poster. What does it
You
say?
can read it for yourself. I abhor.
What does it
bigotry.
say? This
I
image
abhor
says,
bigotry, and I will not
abolish
repeat.
prisons everywhere. This image says, free Palestine. This image says, stop Cop City. This group that produced this poster is allotted to receive $50 million from U.S. taxpayers.
That group has
This
not
is
received
disgusting.
one dime from
This
EPA.
image, this next image, adds an anti-Semitic message, and it calls for defunding the police. This is particularly special. Is this the position, the official position of Biden's EPA? Yes or no?
That fund, they have not received one dime.
Does this sign protect the environment? They are slated to receive $50 million
They have
from
not received
taxpayers.
one dime from EPA.
So you're saying on this next image, this is probably the left's favorite. The quote on this image is from a convicted murderer of a police officer that is still at large and wanted by the FBI. Does the Biden EPA support this position? Yes or no?
These hypotheticals.
So today,
have nothing to do with
our
EPA.
witness can't even answer the questions. $50 million was going to go to this organization vis-a-vis U.S. taxpayers. So you're going to tell me today, are you promising that this group will not receive a single dime? Yes or no?
None of these groups that you have paraded up here have received one dime.
Will you promise to ensure that they won't receive a single taxpayer dollar? This particular group is slated to get $50 million.
Listen,
will you promise me today that they will get zero?
First of all,
yes or no?
half the things you've put up there are offensive, right?
They are offensive, and like I said, it is a fact. This group is going to get is slated to get $50 million from U.S. taxpayers. So our witness today,
Madam
let's show,
Chair,
can't even answer the question.
Madam Chair, will you just allow him to answer you? I think it'd be fair to allow him to answer you.
None
He
of
hasn't
these
answered a
groups have
single
gotten
question.
one dime from EPA, for the record.
Will you promise today that they will receive $0?
None of these groups have gotten one dime from EPA.
I'm sitting in the chair, you're not. So thank you, and I yield back. All right, I will now yield to Ms. Brown from Ohio.
Mr. Regan, I would like to yield to you as much time as you would like to consume to respond to the allegations that were hurled upon you.
Well, I appreciate that because I think it's a gotcha game to put posters and statements that many of us may not agree with, see for the first time, and then accuse the agency of supporting something that is not true. None of the groups that were presented there have received one dime from EPA. People have applied for resources. We're going through a very thorough evaluation, and we have a process to determine who should and should not receive federal funding. Those are the facts.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Oversight. And it's great to see you again.
Good to see you too.
I want to begin by thanking you for the Environmental Protection Agency diligent work in my district, Northeast Ohio, where, as Ranking Member pointed out, is just one example of how the Cuyahoga River was historically polluted, one of the most polluted bodies of water due to the amount of industrial waste dumped into it. As you know, Cuyahoga could not sustain any life at one point. Caught fire more than a dozen times. But thanks to the hard work of the EPA and the Cleveland community, this is no longer a reality. I am proud to have cast one of my very first votes in Congress in support of President Biden's and Vice President Harris's and Democrats-led bipartisan infrastructure law to continue to clean up our precious water resources, which are critical to Cleveland, Northeast Ohio, and the country. EPA's commitment to restoring the Cuyahoga River area economically and environmentally shows how this administration is prioritizing environmental justice. So, Administrator Regan, can you explain what more needs to be done to clean up and support the Cuyahoga River and surrounding areas, both environmentally and for the people who live there?
Well, thank you for the question, and also thank you for hosting me and Secretary Fudge in Cleveland a while back. Listen, I think since the Great Lakes Initiative started in 2010, significant progress has been made. But under your leadership and the leadership of your colleagues partnering with President Biden, we anticipate investing approximately $100 million of EPA bill funds to support and continue the great work that you all are leading. Construction resulting from this funding will start at the end of this year, and it will remove the largest impediment to water quality remaining in the Cuyahoga River. So that'll drive regional economic development, it'll restore important ecosystems, and it will turn this precious body of water back to the natural state that it should be. So thank you for your advocacy there.
Thank you so much. On a related point, my district has long faced challenges in accessing healthy and safe drinking water. According to Cleveland Clinic, lead poisoning rates in the city of Cleveland are four times the national average. This is preventable, and we must overcome such a significant disparity. That is why the infrastructure laws investments have been critical in addressing this public health emergency. These funds are used to remove lead pipes leading to our homes, and improve the access to safe drinking water. This May, the Biden-Harris administration announced an additional $184 million in bipartisan infrastructure law funds to support safe drinking water and replace existing lead service lines in Ohio. So, Administrator Regan, can you share the impact of these investments in improving access to clean drinking water, in particular for low-income families and in the Black community?
You know, these investments are transformational and life-changing. We've met with mothers whose children are lead poisoned, whose families have been poisoned by lead or haven't had a lack of access to clean drinking water. These investments will, number one, create jobs for those who are pulling these lead pipes out. Number two, drinking fresh, clean water for these children that isn't lead poison will give them a competitive edge as they pursue their education. And number three, the economic vitality and opportunities for these communities that are now lead-free are endless. Black and brown communities are disproportionately impacted by these pollutants, have a lack of economic investment. So this is a win-win. We're infusing capital, we're creating jobs, we're creating economic opportunities, and most importantly, our children and our families and our grandparents will be drinking clean, affordable, safe drinking water.
Thank you. Under the Biden-Harris administration, the restored EPA is
Time
working,
is up. 5 minutes is up. I
requesting
apologize.
equal time. You went over your time, Madam Chair, just requesting equal time, please, and thank you.
We're at 20 seconds over. I did not
The
go
attempts
that
on
far
the other
over.
side of
You
the
have 10
aisle to
seconds.
undercut, defund, and dismantle the EPA are deeply dangerous. Our environment and our health depend
Order.
on a
I'm going
fully
to call on the
funded,
next
functional,
member.
and firm
I would like
EPA.
to call on Mr.
Thank
Perry
you, Madam
from
Chair.
Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just out of curiosity, since one of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle brought it up, I do wonder if the then senior senator from Delaware, now the President of the United States, ever challenged DuPont's production and prolific distribution of PFAS and PFOA. Just curious. But I need to talk to you, Administrator, welcome, about Pennsylvania. My bosses, the people that I represent, complain to me nearly daily about their electricity prices. And I'm sure you know that grid operators around the country are sounding the alarm about the potential disruptions, blackouts, brownouts due to regulations, particularly the Clean Power Plan 2.0 rule. As a matter of fact, the PJM Interconnect, the largest multi-state grid operator, which includes the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, stated that in the very years when we are projecting significant increases in the demand for electricity, the final rule will work to drive premature retirement of traditional units that provide essential, reliable services and dissuade new gas resources from coming online. I'm just curious, how does the EPA factor in the cost to the people that I represent that can't afford their electricity bills, or the grid operators who are saying, don't do this, we can't sustain this? How does the EPA factor that into the decision to just move forward and say, kind of damn the torpedoes?
Well, I think there's a process and maybe a difference in some of these statements. When the rule was proposed, we engaged in a lengthy round of conversations. I even, Congressman Bill Johnson, who was our subcommittee chair at the time, hosted a number of meetings with me and industry and the like, and grid operators. And so we've had robust conversations. I think PJM has made a statement that acknowledges that numerous adjustments were made in between the proposal and final that really began to help address some of their concerns about reliability.
So are there claims about the reliability and the inability to provide power and the fact that it will result in blackouts and brownouts? Is that not true? Or they?
We believe that we have resolved all anxiety about.
But they're still making the statement. And what about ratepayers? What about people paying the bill? Pennsylvania, it's hot right now in the summertime.
Sure.
It's cold in the wintertime.
Yes.
They can't afford their bills now. The bills are going to go up, right? It's essentially supply and demand. There's going to be great demand, but less supply. Where does their need factor into your decision making?
It factors in heavily, and as I've conversed with numerous utility executives and those that manage, they're going to be looking at a suite of technologies to provide electricity. So our estimates are less than 1% increase in price over the next 10 to 15 years.
Okay, so your estimates are less than a 1% increase in price over 10 to 15 years.
Yes.
Can you attest to that and promise that it will not go up more than 1% in the next 15 years?
What we can do is we can provide you all the data.
No, sir. You're moving the rule. It's being fought in the courts.
Sure.
But the people that I work for, my bosses that can't afford their groceries, can't afford gasoline, can't afford their daycare, can't afford electricity, you're saying that you've gotten their input and this is not going to impact them essentially more than 1% over the next 15 years. I want you to promise me right now, because I got to go face them. I have to face them.
Yeah, I think I think you can assure them that the EPA Administrator said that his experts, the experts at FERC, DOE, and EPA, all agree on the assessments that have been made on reliability and cost.
Okay, so it's not going to go up more than 1%, and if it does, then what? Then what do you do? Do you quit your job? Do you pay them the difference? What happens then?
Well, the way these rules are designed, they are designed, and each state has a state implementation plan. So it's not like
so we're going to pass the buck. It's not your problem, and somehow it was the states that did it to them.
States have flexibilities in terms of how they're delegated programs. So we give the states the autonomy. They design special state implementation programs, and they are ensuring that the individuality of that state is met with that planning. And the planning for North Carolina is different from the planning in Nevada.
And I appreciate that, and God bless the people from North Carolina. I don't want them to have to pay any more either, but I don't represent them. I got to face the people of South Central Pennsylvania that can't afford their bills right now, and you're telling me it's not going to go up more than 1% over the next 15 years, but if it does, somehow it's the state's fault.
Thank you, Mr. Perry.
The states have flexibilities to adjust.
Our time is up. 5 minutes is up. I would like to yield 5 minutes to Mr. Garcia from California.
Thank you. Thank you, Administrator, for being here. I appreciate your service. You're obviously helping to implement the biggest climate bill in history, which we passed under President Biden. My district includes the Port of Long Beach. I'm the former mayor of Long Beach. We know that the port itself, you were just in the Port of Los Angeles, I think, our neighbor, a huge economic engine for the country. We're fighting to electrify the Port of Long Beach right now under the $3 billion EPA Clean Port program. I wrote to you last week. You responded. We're very grateful to your response and the team, and so we're excited about that opportunity. But I want to turn also on this broader issue of environmental justice. I want to just quickly highlight a case where polluters are getting a pass, and residents in my community, the northern part of my district, are feeling the impact. In Vernon, California, small city in southeast Los Angeles, Exide Technologies spent decades recycling batteries and dumping lead and toxins into the air. This includes soil and water, which has now seeped through. Now, the company poisoned surrounding communities in Southeast LA, where people suffer from cancer, asthma, learning disabilities, and dangerous levels of lead in their blood. Now, the Obama administration forced Exide to make commitments to fix and fund the cleanup. But in 2020, Trump's EPA and Department of Justice abandoned those responsibilities and approved a bankruptcy plan that let Exide essentially walk away from the cleanup. This is not acceptable to me and certainly not to the communities that I represent. Now, Administrator, one of my first acts when I came to Congress was to lead the call for a federal Superfund designation, along with Senator Padilla. This will secure, of course, federal funds to clean the site that is desperately needed to provide this community true justice. I've been glad that this process has moved forward, and in fact, just recently, we passed a major milestone. Last week, the EPA site inspection report showed the site is eligible for a Superfund listing based on the levels of groundwater contamination. So I want to thank your team for partnering with us there, and I just want to formally ask you to once again just continue to commit to really push for this issue as we move forward to that Superfund designation.
Absolutely. You have my commitment on that.
Thank you, sir. Now, as we're talking about environmental justice, I want to just highlight that your agency is working every day to implement the biggest climate bill in history. And we are in a climate crisis. I think we all understand that. But I also want to look at an alternative plan for your agency. Now, this is Project 2025, which is Donald Trump's anti-environmental agenda. And I want to just note some of the main features of Project 2025. It includes shredding pollution regulations, gutting clean energy programs, repealing the Inflation Reduction Act, President Biden's climate law, which we know is landmark, and of course, empowering corporate polluters. Now, we know that Donald Trump's Project 2025 destroys the EPA. He'll let corporations dump more toxins into our air and water like he did the last time he was president. We know that he will empower corporate polluters and fill the EPA with hand-picked extremists rather than actual climate experts, and who will destroy the progress that President Biden has fought for. Now, he is promising to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. And let's be clear, repealing the bill doesn't just mean reversing the historic progress that we have made. It means threatening jobs and businesses all over the country. Over 1,000 projects already are underway, deploying hydrogen, hydropower, wind, batteries, solar energy, which will all make us more green and independent and really leading us to a greener future. That's also hundreds of thousands of jobs. And we know why he's pushing this dangerous agenda. Donald Trump met with big oil executives to promise to carry out their policy agenda in exchange for $1 billion in campaign contributions, which Oversight Democrats are actually investigating. And if that wasn't enough, he promised he would pay back his big oil donors with tax cuts for the rich. And as we know, worst of all, his agenda will be enabled by an extremist Supreme Court that Donald Trump himself appointed. Now, Administrator, I know you can't address a candidate's policy platform. I know that's not why you're here. So instead, I want you to just please explain how important it is that the agency continues to implement the Inflation Reduction Act and the climate gains that we've already achieved.
Well, listen, I'll say this. One program in the Inflation Reduction Act is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. That Congress allotted us $27 billion. We designed a program in consultation with the financial sector, every aspect of the financial sector. We believe that we can pull hundreds of billions of dollars off the sidelines to make homes more energy efficient, to build manufacturing capacity in this country, to create jobs. It's important for me to say that these are not just happening in blue states. They're happening in red states. They're happening in Alabama and Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And so this really does prove that clean energy has a role in the new economy and is creating hundreds of thousands of jobs all across this country. But more important, it's making us secure because we're bringing the manufacturing back domestically. Rolling back these types of provisions, eliminating career scientists at EPA, it's just going to ruin the economy and it's going to ruin the progress that we're making.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, now recognize Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator, for being here. Administrator Regan, the National Ambient Air Quality Standard rule sets a standard based on airborne particulate matter. What are some of the sources of particulate matter?
Many stationary sources as well as mobile sources.
Right, and the stationary sources include energy production, industrial processes, agriculture, activities, et cetera, right? And mobile, diesel, gasoline-powered vehicles, but you just mentioned anthropogenic or man-made particulate production. But there's also natural sources as well, and does EPA have a breakdown of emissions generated by source sector between, I'm talking specifically between man-made versus naturally occurring?
Yes.
And let's go over that. Here's what they break it down to. Energy production, industrial processes, mobile sources account for only 21% of total PM emissions. Ag accounts for 14%, dust for 16%, and fires account for 43%. Does that sound right? I'm reading from the National Emissions Inventory of May 2022. Does that sound right to you?
I don't have that document in front of me, but it sounds in the ballpark.
Okay. So the question is, as you're no doubt aware, I'm from Arizona, so many areas in Arizona, including those in my district, are in desert ecosystems featuring many natural sources of emissions. The May 2022 EPA Policy Assessment actually for Phoenix actually cites a 2011 dust storm as affecting particulates in Phoenix. We also have a drought that's been going on for 26 years. That contributes to wildfire risk. We have wildfires out there. And so my question for you ultimately becomes this. How do you propose that Arizona non-attainment areas, areas with significant naturally occurring background particulate matter, comply with the new standards that EPA has proposed?
Well, I'm proud to say that because of consultation with members like you and others, when we look
by the way, just clarify, not to interrupt, I'm interrupting, but I don't mean to be rude about it. You and I didn't ever consult, but go ahead.
Yeah, yes. But we have consulted with members in Arizona and Nevada and places that you described, and this is why we have a very strong exceptional events policy. Monitoring technology is advanced enough to determine where the pollution comes from. And so we don't want to penalize states where we see an exacerbation of PM 2.5 that comes from a wildfire or a dust storm or something that is not man-made. So we have procedures in place. 99% of counties in this country are projected to meet the standard by 2032. And the reason that is because we don't count some of the things that you just laid out.
Well, I'll just tell you that I invite you to come out and live in Arizona for about 6 months in the Phoenix metro area, and the #1 particulate, it ain't pollution caused by man, it is caused by dust storms and dust coming out. And we've been counseled, go ahead and wet it down. Use that if you're going to stir up dust. Now, that's absurd. I want to get to another question, another area real quick, and that is on May 8, 2024, EPA formally awarded less than $2 billion of its $42 billion in IRA-related funding. Is that accurate? I mean, that's just about 2 months ago. Is that accurate that you've only awarded $2 billion of the 42 out of IRA?
I'd have to get back to you. I don't have that number in front of me.
The reason I ask is because that's supposed to expire on September 30th, and that's $27 billion in EPA funding under the IRA, which will not have been disseminated. And the reason that that's important is because I want to know if you have any in the pipeline that you're going to grant before the end of September 30th this fiscal year, or is that $2 billion that in total? Is that going to be it? Can you find that out for me if you don't know that today?
Yes, I'm making the assumption, which I believe is true, is that it's going to be in the pipeline and pushed out before. But let me be specific and get back to my staff on that.
I would like that. I appreciate that very much. Last question, last area is we've had 3 recent cases, one a little older, and that's the West Virginia case. You've also had the Ohio v. EPA case, which is the EPA's Clean Air Act, FIP, is being stayed until to the duration of that litigation. You have Loper, which set aside and overruled Chevron. I want to know what your agency is doing to respond to that, to those particular cases, and because it looks like West Virginia was ignored by EPA because you were actually well, because I'm out of time, I wanted you to answer that, if you would, please.
Yeah, I can absolutely say that EPA did not run afoul of the West Virginia Supreme Court issue, so we'd have to talk a little bit more about that. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there. On the other court cases, a lot of these court cases are recent. For the Good Neighbor Rule, yes, the Supreme Court stated. I feel pretty good about our case and how we're going to pursue that in the lower court. In terms of Chevron, listen, when I signed up for this job, I pledged to follow the law and follow the science, and the Supreme Court has spoken, and so we have to figure out how we get our work done under this new ruling.
Thank you. Gentlemen, time's expired. Chair now recognizes Ms. Lee from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Administrator Regan, for sharing your time with us today. Environmental rules and regulations aren't just important for tackling the climate crisis. They're essential for addressing the toxic legacy of environmental racism and injustice. Growing up in the Mon Valley of Western Pennsylvania, I saw firsthand the devastating effects of unchecked pollution. Back then, when I was growing up, I didn't quite have the language or the expertise to explain the science of pollution, but I had my years of experience living in an environment where the air we breathed was harmful. I knew that wherever you were, if you were black or you were brown or you were poor, you were likely breathing toxic air too. Our country ranks in the top 1% nationwide for cancer risk from air pollution. In my hometown of North Braddock, cancer rates are more than double the rest of the country. Approximately 90% of residents are at risk of exposure to particulate matter. Our childhood asthma rates are nearly 3 times the national average. These statistics aren't just numbers. They represent very real people and very real families and very real communities overburdened by industrial pollution. Administrator Regan, under your leadership, addressing environmental racism and justice has become a core component of the EPA's work, including through the rulemaking process. Can you speak to how the EPA's recently finalized rules, such as the soot rule and the carbon pollution standards, will specifically improve conditions for individuals in overburdened and underserved communities?
Well, absolutely, and thank you for sharing your personal testimony there. There are so many of us that have grown up and lived in areas where we are hit by unchecked pollution, and the way to do this is the way we've done it, which is create a separate office, a National Program Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights that spends time with our national programs that look at air and water issues, to be sure that as we are designing our regulations, we are not leaving any communities behind. And what we've done a great job of is really ensuring that the statistics that you just laid out, statistics in communities all across the country, are infused into the ultimate result of these regulations. Our regulations are not only better for the United States, they're absolutely better for those who have been disproportionately dumped on for decades. Our children now are breathing cleaner air, they're not drinking lead-poisoned water, and they're doing better in school, and they're happier, and they're healthier. And so that's what we've been doing the last 3.5 years, and we're gonna keep doing that.
Thank you. While developing strong environmental regulations is crucial, we know that it's just half of the battle. These regulations are only as effective as they're backed by rigorous enforcement. Across the country, many black, brown, and poor communities continue to bear the brunt of environmental hazards as their corporate polluters just flout the rules with little consequences. For decades, industry has promoted this myth that pollution is merely an unavoidable price to pay for economic growth. Yet we know that this narrative is just a false choice that primarily serves to shield big polluters from accountability for their chronic environmental harms, ultimately harming both those frontline, fence line communities and the workers. In just the past 2 years alone, one facility in my district has been fined as much as $14 million for hundreds of violations. And unfortunately, we know this company is not an outlier. For corporate polluters all across the country, it's clear that these fines are just a fraction of their massive earnings, and they don't actually serve as a deterrent. It's just a cost of doing business. So, Administrator Regan, how is the EPA working to ensure that chronic corporate polluters face real consequences when they consistently dump toxins into our communities?
Well, number one, we have to continue to be vigilant with our enforcement capabilities and not let any of the polluters off the hook. I believe that the polluters should pay. But secondly, as we take a look at these facilities, there's communication with the arms of our office that design regulations that show many of these companies can not only meet these standards, they can go below. So when we design a new regulation, then there are stiffer penalties associated with those newer regulations. So as we ramp down pollution through a regulatory approach, we also give our enforcement teams more authority to hit them a little bit harder.
So what additional enforcement authorities does the EPA need from Congress to address this, the chronic polluters effectively?
Well, you know, I think, listen, we have a very strong enforcement team. I think the only limitations we have is does the fine match the action, which you've laid out? And I think we have some statutory constraints in terms of just how much we can fine a facility. Some of these facilities have very egregious behavior, as you've laid out, but the statutory authority only allows for us to fine them a certain amount. And so if those amounts are raised and are proportionate to the crime, we will do our job and we will hold those polluters accountable.
Thank you, Administrator, for your time. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Grofman from Wisconsin.
I represent Wisconsin. I think a lot of people don't know it, but Wisconsin has the highest percentage of manufacturing jobs in the country. Did you know that, Administrator Regan?
I did.
Man, that's my type of guy. That's great. Okay, so you know we have a little bit of a problem, though, with our Wisconsin manufacturing along Lake Michigan. You know, Milwaukee County, the counties to the north of there, Ozaukee, Sheboygan County, and that it's ruled non-attainment because of high ozone levels. Now, those ozone levels only occur in certain days along Lake Michigan, and it's something to do about the interaction of the sun and the lake and that sort of thing. And even insofar as there's pollution on Lake Michigan, most of that pollution comes up from Chicago or even further south. So in other words, even if there are no factories in Milwaukee or the counties north of there, we might be in non-attainment. And because we're in non-attainment, it results in having to do things like having special tests on your car. Maybe if you're somebody who can't afford a new car, you're really getting harmed because you might have to spend $1,000 to get your car up to snuff when, you know, the amount of pollution is minimal anyway. So I always feel this thing really disproportionately affects the poor person who, you know, if I have a new car for 5 years, I'll pass that thing no problem. Right. But if I have an old car, like I said, it may be pay $800 or get you pay $8,000 or get yourself a new car. Are you guys working towards or have a plan towards getting places like Milwaukee and the surrounding area back in attainment so our factories do not have to be at a competitive disadvantage, not only with the rest of the country, but the rest of the world?
We do, and I'm very sympathetic to what you just laid out. I witnessed that time and time again in North Carolina. The plan that we had in place to begin to help places like Milwaukee, the Supreme Court just shut it down. I believe that when air pollution comes from another